The parsha this week is Parshat Noach, 5785. I think we all yearn for the simple, clean viewpoint of Noach. He was a hero. It says in the Torah he was a tzaddik, something that other people aren't described as. He walked with God. He lived at a terrible time where God had decided to destroy all mankind except for him because he found favor in God's eyes. He followed Hashem's directives. He built an ark. He gathered all the animals onto it. He went onto the ark with his immediate family, his wife and his 3 sons and their wives. And he survived and he rebuilt mankind. What a wonderful thing. And then immediately, Jewish tradition, the rabbis, even the prophets begin to rain on this parade. If we just look at the Haftorah, the prophet Isaiah in chapter 54, sentence 9, he calls the flood Mei Noach. These are Noach's waters, as if Noach brought the flood upon the world. And yet it certainly seems as though Noach was the one saving grace, and none of us would be here without him. So we find other examples where it says he was a tzaddik in his generation, and Rashi says right away, well, that's his generation. Maybe in other generations he wouldn't have been. If he lived at the time of Abraham, he wouldn't have been. Maybe he would have been a righteous person. You even find Rashi commenting that his going onto the ark, which he built with his own 2 hands in order to rescue humanity, he delayed in going into the ark, as it says in chapter 7, sentence 7 on page 32. That Noach and his family came El Ateva mipnei mehamabul. He wasn't even perfect in his belief that the flood was going to take place, which is amazing because he spent a lifetime, literally a lifetime, of building that ark and staying true to his ideals and his values in the face of so much social pressure and rejection. How do we understand this? So we're going to use a Zohar, quoted by Rav Lopiansky in a recent article. It's a very surprising Zohar, and it really merits our attention. And it describes Noach after the flood, walking out of the ark. And it literally says he's walking through the muck and mud. I think of the images we see in the news after floods, houses swept away, filled with all the schmutz in the world, houses buried underground, all these tragic viewpoints that we've gotten used to. Noach gets out of the ark. He's walking through it, and he turns to God. And amazingly, at this point, the Zohar says he turns to God and says, how could you do this? And God responds to him. God says, how could I do this? Noach, did I not foretell that a flood was going to come? Did I not, at a later junction, tell you to build an ark, which you did for 120 years? Did I not tell you it's time to get into the ark as the waters were coming? Are you kidding me? Where was your voice in prayer? Where were you in calling out to me then and pleading on behalf of the Jewish people? Not an easy thing to understand and make sense of. And that's what we're going to do, because I think it has a lot of bearing on the way each of us live our own lives and the way we dice and slice the reality around us and come to a comfortable place of living. And perhaps we too can do better. You see, if you put yourself in Noach's shoes, Noach had to be tremendously tenacious in being a righteous person. No one else was. There was thievery going on. There was immorality. There was idolatry. There was murder. It was a chaotic society where might makes right, and where there was no such thing as right or wrong. It was just grabbing and taking, and everything that the word Hamas in Hebrew means in terms of a sense of just squeezing out every benefit for myself I can possibly get without any possible other consideration. Noach was born into this world. He lived within this world, and yet he was righteous, and yet he understood that he wanted to remain purely attached to God, and he accomplished that. Tamim haya b'darasav. He was wholehearted. He was together. He walked with God. He perceived God in the world. What an amazing accomplishment. But if we put ourselves in Noach's shoes, we can also imagine that Noach, in this resolve to remain a good person, had to build big barriers between himself and the world around him. Noach had to say the world is crazy. People are terrible. This isn't what God had in mind when he created the world. It's disgusting. It's revolting. I can't even bear to look at it. And yet, don't think that Noach was a recluse, because the whole process of building the ark was meant to have Noach engage with the world around him. And he did. He started building, and people came and said, Noach, what are you doing? He said, well, God has told me through prophecy that the world's coming to an end, that this is unsustainable. We know it's unsustainable anyway, socially, but it's unsustainable spiritually. It's actually going to undo the creation of the world, the very act of creation that separated the lower waters from the upper waters to create space for humanity as part of the 7 days of creation. It's all coming undone because the purpose for which that separation took place is being trampled upon and forgotten and is being paid no heed. So of course it's going to become undone. And Noach explained this to people. Noach became, in the words of certain Chazal, a great social critic. And even the Ramban, when he talks about Es Elokim Hitalech Noach, that Noach walked with God, he raises this nuance of idea that Noach only focused on God. I'm not going to pay attention to other people. I'm not connected to these people. These people are terrible. They're destroying God's world, and they really weren't destroying God's world. So Noah created a space for himself. And if you think about it, when he got into the ark, as the waters came up to his nose, and as he reluctantly got into the ark, at that moment, the ark became a prison for him, a secluded place. The rest of the world was being wiped out, was churning and being destroyed and covered up, so that all would be left would be muck and mud in the most literal sense of the world, to a word, to an amazing extent. That's what he was going to see. And the Ramban indicates that Noah's attitude was based upon his tenacity in wanting to remain uncorrupted, and his recognition that, hey, if God came to me and said, through you, mankind is going to be sustained and the world I created is going to be reborn and restarted, then I've got to do everything I can to protect myself. You can't really fault him so much for that, or can you? Now, the Zohar does, because the Zohar says, God says to him, where was your voice? Where was your voice in prayer? Where was your sense of questioning how God could do this in advance, not after the fact, when the people were still staring you in the face in all of their evil and debauchery and disbelief and selfishness and completely absorbed in their own pursuit of pleasure? Where was your voice then? And Noah, if you think about it, probably didn't have that voice before the flood. He stifled that voice. Yes, he interacted with people. Noach, what's going on? I'm building an ark. Why are you doing that? Well, God's disgusted with the world. Do you see how there's no sanctity? There's no holiness between a husband and wife. There's no sense of respecting other people's property. There's no sense of having any reverence for God. People say, oh, those are old ideas. Don't give me that. Noach was a piercing social critic, but to no avail, because he, out of necessity to maintain his integrity, had built this invisible barrier between himself and the rest of mankind, and he was clinging to God with both hands. He felt that's the only way to survive. So what does God do? He spends the entire time in the flood caring for all the rest of living beings, feeding them 24/7, he and his wife and his sons and their wives. It required superhuman energy, commitment, love, devotion, feeding the nocturnal animals at night and feeding the ones that need food in the morning and preparing the food in the afternoon and seeing to it that the whole menagerie contained within that ark was sustained in spite of the fact that there was no sustainable conditions around them, that the world, in a sense, had been returned to tohu vavohu in the most literal sense of the word, save for his little cubits of ark. And he did so. So think about that when he emerged after spending all that time in devotion to others, and he looks around and he walks through what used to be a city, what used to be a town, what used to be a place, a marketplace, seeing nothing remaining from human life and literally destruction every place. That's when, after that experience, he finds his voice and he turns to God and says, God, how could you do this? And there's a lot of implications here in terms of the way he understood his fellow man, the way he understood himself, and the way he understood God. And that's what we're going to unravel here. But we'll start with the contrast here, because clearly the commentaries who find Noach lacking, their comparison is to Abraham. And Abraham, of course, was this enormous spiritual giant who emerged in the world also as a solitary being, also with a vision of iconoclasm. Hebrew, I'm on one side of the river, the rest of the world's on the other side of the river. But yet Abraham's sense of connection and rapport with the world around him was completely different. How do we see this? I'll give you an example. In later on next week's reading, chapter 17, sentence 1, page 72 in the Art Scroll, God comes to Noah, says, Hisalech lefanai ve'yeh tamim, words that echo Noah. You're going to walk with me. You're going to walk ahead of me. You're going to be whole and pure. And I'm going to give you a mitzvah, himol lochem. You'll circumcise yourself. You're going to make yourself physically distinguished from the rest of mankind, just as you are spiritually distinguished through the way you live your life. Wow, what an opportunity. Certainly Abraham appreciated it. We even find the rabbis commenting that Abraham knew about the benefits of circumcision before being commanded, but he wanted to wait for God to command him because it's a greater mitzvah to do when God commands you to do something than it is to do it out of your own volition because you're doing it out of fealty and out of a sense of service to God. So he waited. The mitzvah finally came. He's 99 years old. But the Medrash records, what does Abraham say to God? Abraham says, 1 second, your mitzvot are precious. It's going to make me more akin to you, more a greater match as a tselem Elohim, as a godly image. But it's going to differentiate me from others. And perhaps that will make me less influential on the world. Perhaps it'll curtail my opportunity to teach others, to share my vision of humanity, to share my understanding of godliness, to do kindness to others. They'll see me as something other, something different. And God reassures him, just as we need this reassurance throughout our own lives. Not the way it works. The wisdom, the nations of the world ultimately respect the Jewish people for their wisdom in adhering to mitzvot. Meaning what? You wear a kippah. Does that mean I'm making other people uncomfortable? Certainly not what I want to do, but I want to show that there's a reverence of God around me, and I want to do it in a way that makes me an example that perhaps you'll choose to emulate. I'm not going to eat everybody else's food because we have kosher restrictions. I'm not going to run with the crowd because I have Shabbat to look forward to as a day which has a different rhythm and a different time to it. There's so many distinctions taking place naturally, but we can trust in God that when the mitzvot were given to us, we remain a light unto the nations. And God's creating that distinction so that people can look toward us and learn from us, and we can set a clear example that the world can follow, believe it or not. That's what it means to be a light unto the nations. Not just to be everybody's pal, but to be everyone's friend with distinction, with spirituality, with devotion to attachment to God. So you see Avram's reaction to the very idea of being identified as someone who walks with God, given a covenant, a specific covenant. Look how different it is. Look how different it was compared to the example that Noach had set in the world. Different element of connection to the world. Yes, there's value in some isolation when it comes to preserving goodness. A kala under the chuppah walks around her husband 7 times, showing that she's taking responsibility to have limitations and to mark out a household where only things of sanctity and propriety are going to come in so that children can be raised with a sense of purity, with a sense of openness to what's right and wrong, and not just an anything goes, whatever's out there is okay attitude. We do believe in creating separations, but just like the house of Abraham and Sarah, which was a different kind of a place, it was marked by a palpable presence of God. It was also open, welcoming, attracting to others. We get this idea in several places. In Pirkei Avot, we have what seems to be a redundancy. If you look at chapter 1, Mishnah 16, so we're taught Mekabel kol adam b'sever panim yafos. I need to smile at people. I need to show myself welcoming. I need to walk in the world in a manner which shows people that I share your humanity. In the 3rd chapter, Mishnah 12, we're taught heavy Mekabel kol adam b'simcha, accept people with joy. What's the difference? So the commentaries explain something very, very important to us. I need an external interface of the world, which demonstrates interest, which demonstrates an interest in connecting. But it has to be based on an inner joy of understanding that God created many human beings. God created each person uniquely different opinions, different ways of serving Hashem. And it's not that all ways of serving Hashem are equal, but it's that ultimately respect for the other person can be maintained under all circumstances. And that's why when Abraham is described by Rabbeinu Yonah, he's described ultimately as a nadiv lev, as a person, a generous person, generosity of heart. What does that mean? He was teaching people that there's a God, which they weren't aware of. He was teaching people what it means to emulate God through kindness, through compassion, through understanding. He was teaching people that you can trust in God, that you don't have to grab everything for yourself, because God allocates things fairly. And what's yours is yours, and it's okay, and you'll be okay with it. And let the other person enjoy what he has. And God will worry about providing for each and every one of us what we really need. All that was included in the heart of an Abraham, and hence he was amazingly influential. Hence, even though he lived in a terrible time, even though he saw mankind devote themselves to build the Tower of Babel, even though he saw a world that was devoid of kindness, he could speak to the better natures of the people around him out of concern, out of love, out of a sense that I have this spiritual richness that I enjoy, and I don't want to just keep it for myself. Because like a candle, if I light another candle, my candle burns just as bright, and then there's twice as much light in the world. Avram felt that deeply within his bones, and with that he was able to reach across the spiritual divide and yearn to connect and share what he had with other people. And hence he had a tremendous impact on the whole world. And hence he was able to found and create a legacy that has withstood every imaginable challenge that mankind could possibly throw at him. So what do we see from this? We see first and foremost, Abraham understood separation and connection coexisting one with the other. He understood what it means to remain deeply respectful deeply concerned for all others. And hence Abraham does remarkable things in his life. The very nephew Lot, who he separates from, because Lot was destroying his standing in the world as an honest person, he then goes out and risks his life to rescue when it comes time to help him. The very son Yishmael, who he sends away so that his son Isaac can remain uncorrupted and pure and holy, the Medrash tells us for the rest of his life, he traveled great distances to visit Yishmael, to give him moral advice and uplift, to let him know that you have a father in me. You have a sense of love, a sense of concern and devotion. And hence, ultimately, when Avram passes away, Yishmael is there dutifully to participate in his burial, because that connection remained. The very father who sent his son off in exile reluctantly, God told him, you have to do what your wife tells you, and he did. But he maintained a connection, a loving, devoted connection with him throughout these long lives, throughout all these circumstances. And in spite of knowing prophetically that ultimately the descendants of Yishmael would become the arch enemies of the descendants of Abraham, but he still was able to see through that because of his nedivus leiv, because of what he brought to the table. Hence, by tradition, Avram was not a social critic. Unlike Noach, who was able to write op-eds in the newspaper showing people how unsustainable an evil world is, Avram's op-eds talked about getting to know God, seeing within yourself an image of God. According to the Sephorno, he spoke to people in a way that uplifted them, that made them come to understand that there was intrinsic value in their souls and in their conduct and in their lives in a way that won over more or less a huge swath of mankind. And we find this idea played out. I want to use two examples, and with that we'll end. There's an amazing midrash. It's in Vayikra Rabbah 9:3, and it talks about Yanai. Yanai was a great sage, but apparently Yanai was once out in the marketplace, and he saw what seemed to him to be a very distinguished person, and he invited that person to come dine with him, and the person did, and sat at Yanai's table. And when it came time to talk about Torah and things, the person was very unknowledgeable, unconversant. When it came time even to bless, to do the Birchat HaMazon, the grace after meals, and Yanai tried to honor him, the person didn't know the words, couldn't read the words. Yanai became upset. He felt he had been captured by a ruse, that perhaps he'd been taken advantage of. And he states, Yanai just fed a dog. An amazingly harsh view of what took place. But the person opposite him says, excuse me, I believe I learned when I was young, and I didn't learn very much, but I learned when I was young that Torah is the legacy. Torah, Morashah, Kihilat Yaakov. It's the legacy of the Jewish people. That means it's not just Yanai's possession, but it's my possession as well. If you have it in abundance and I'm lacking it, is that a reason to separate and cut me off? Or is it not a reason for you, Yanai, to take on responsibility to teach me and educate me and raise me up and share with me so that out of your billions worth of wisdom, you can share with me who has crumbs and don't feel as though you're feeding a dog. Quite an amazing, stark medrash. Now, again, I would say Yanai felt, in defense of Yanai, that this person had tricked him. But in truth, once the story is completed, I think we can understand that this person coming to grips with his ignorance, coming to grips with the void in his life of not having this precious legacy that was handed down by Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, to us, the Jewish people, being deprived of that, decided, I'll put on the outer garments and I'll approach a sage in the marketplace, so at least I can begin my journey of growth, because that's what I yearn for. I recognize I need that. And how do I recognize that? Because I see these outstanding individuals like Iyanai who so represent godliness and kindness and compassion and concern for others in combination with closeness to God, observance of Shabbat, and certainly living their lives as distinguished, distinct Jewish people. So that's what this Medrash awakens us to, this tremendously deep necessity of commitment that people can have to one another and not allow anything to come between them. And then I want to tell you a story about Daphna that I read recently in the press. And it was an individual Israeli writer who interviewed many, many of those people who lived in the Gaza envelope and who suffered so terribly on October 7th and chose to tell 38 stories. And one of them is a woman named Daphna from Beria. It's a long story, but to cut to the chase. Daphna, who was a person known for her kindness towards the Gazans, who helped bring children to their doctor's appointments, and who saw herself as breaking down bridges, was also a person who believed in keeping ritual Judaism and rabbis out of her community. And she built that wall. She saw programs that were offered to the kibbutz, educational programs, celebration programs, even a basketball game between a group of yeshiva students and the high school there. We don't want that. It's like a Trojan horse. You're only coming to us because you feel we are nothing and that you are gods and that you're out to just win us over to your way of life. Well, we have a way of life also, and I'm proud of it. Okay. Lo and behold, on October 7th, she's captured and taken into one of the terror dungeons in Gaza. She speaks Arabic well. After being there for a certain time, she sees an older guard. She turns to the guard, starts talking to him, the terrorist guard, in Arabic, and saying, I did a lot of kindness for the people of Gaza. Didn't move him. She says, we're relatives. We're all descendants of Abraham. She's speaking in Arabic to him. And he says back to her, no, you're not. Oh, no, you're not. You're not a descendant of Abraham. You're a colonizer. You came here as an Israeli to take our land away from us. That's why we're holding you in prison. That's why you're a hostage. That's why we're attacking you the way we are. Don't tell me that you are part of the rich spiritual legacy of Abraham, because you're not. And this made Daphne think, because Daphne herself remembered that when she traveled to Europe and people would stop her in the street and say, oh, you're a fellow Jew, you're Jewish. She would say, no, 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 don't call me Jewish. I'm Israeli. She herself had created a space that she was comfortable in. And it was a beautiful space of doing kindness and compassion and living a very righteous life, separating herself from fellow Jews in a way that was truly a wall. Daphne, these words, this conversation hitting her deeply, she starts screaming at the guard, I am a Jew. I am a Jew. I'm a descendant of Abraham, just like you are. How could you do this to me? I'm a Jew. And then she began to listen to what she herself was saying. And so when she was exchanged out in the second hostage deal, and she was able to be free from the terror dungeon, she emerged with a different identity, with a different sense of connection to people who believed and felt like her, and people who believed and felt not like her amongst the Jewish people. She reconnected with a sense of Judaism, which really came originally out of the heart of Abraham, out of a sense of generosity, out of a sense of love for others. And indeed, the Rosh Hashiva of Chavetz Chaim wrote very poignantly that if a person doesn't have an affinity of love towards their fellow Jews, and no matter how learned they are, no matter how erudite they are, they're going to be very limited in the ability to have any impact on anyone else. And I saw recently that Rav Hurwitz, the author of Navardik, writing in the 20s writes to yeshiva students, make learning your priority, but don't make the learning of Torah come between you and your connection to your fellow Jews. And he writes, even if you're at a moment in your own development where you need to double down on your studying and you need to remove all distractions, even at such a time, keep in mind that the goal is to reemerge so that you can be a positive impact on your fellow Jews and ultimately a positive impact on the world. A lot to think about here from the Parsha of Noach. How do we self-identify? How do we deal with the complexity of life? How do we preserve and protect those aspects of ourselves that we're most proud of without it coming to build a wall of indifference and uncaring and perhaps even hatred between us and people we disagree with? That's the contrast that the rabbis want us to understand. When it's called May Noach, it's not as simple as the fact that Noach was a heartless person who had no sympathy for others. That's not the case. Noach was a godly person who revered all of God's creation, but felt that his self-preservation of his righteousness required him to cut all ties with others. Avram Avinu lived as a distinct, distinguished individual, standing up to the whole world, but from within himself, it was based on love, generosity, a sense of sharing, a sense of being charitable, a sense of wanting to share the spoils of his greatness with others. And he did, and he continues to do so. And may we adjust our own identities and find our own path through life, preserving everything that's good and becoming good in the areas that we're not so good in, but not doing so at the expense of seeing our fellow Jews and with love and with kindness, and not always being ready to raise our voices on behalf of others, not always being ready to pray, open our mouths to God, to remain aspiring to a world that includes everyone in goodness, in spirituality, and growth. As we do so, we will see the world become a far kinder, comfortable place for each of us. Let's just continue to learn from this Parsha and put it into practice. And I hope and pray we do so, each of us.